I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good, man. We were picking through the 53-man roster, and a couple of things stand out, of course. We'll get into Hufanga and Elijah Mitchell's injury, where he's placed on a season-ending IR, so we won't see him this year and didn't really see him at all in the preseason. But anything, just general 30,000-foot view, what was your key takeaway from the 53-man coming out today? Any surprises?
Well, it's obviously not finished yet. So when you see they only have 2 tight ends on it, that's the biggest giveaway. They always carry 4. They might carry 3 this year. It's possible, but they're definitely not only carrying 2. So what they're doing is they've got a couple guys on there that will almost certainly go on IR tomorrow, but they had to put them on IR so they're eligible to return this season. They had to put them on the 53-man roster so that they're eligible to return from IR this season. So that's John Feliciano with the knee surgery and Ambry Thomas with the broken forearm. So you're probably going to see them bring back somebody like Eric Saubert, the tight end 2, who was clearly tight end 2 throughout all of camp. And that's not going to happen until tomorrow. And this is the kind of maneuver that you see all around the NFL every year so that teams can work their way around some of the injury rules. So that's my biggest takeaway right now is that the roster, this is just the first draft.
Sure.
And then we'll see kind of the first, and I can never say final because the roster is going to be living and breathing throughout the whole season. It'll be changing all the time. But this is the very, very initial draft of the 53-man roster where, if you had to say what's the biggest surprise, like as far as cuts go, I think the fact that both Cam Latu and Braden Willis were cut. I'm not surprised by either of those 2 in a vacuum because Jake Tonjes was really good. But it just goes to show you that there's urgency with the 49ers now, and they'll give a guy about a year of runway. But if you get, that second year, if there are better options on the roster, they really can't afford to sit around and just use the 53-man as a developmental league.
When you look at the receiving core, that's another group, of course, everybody was paying attention to. They had a lot of guys in camp and made a lot of cuts. Debo, Ronnie Bell, Ayuk, assuming he's here, Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, Chris Conley, and Jacob Cowing. Cowing is the one who I think at the end of the preseason really stood out to everybody. He had a couple of nice plays. He offers you a little bit of return ability on the special teams side of things. When you look at how they could break things down for week 1, if you don't have Ayuk or if he's there and he's very limited based on how little he's been with the team in terms of actual reps and practice, how does this square up, you think? When we talked to Kyle last week, he said maybe Juwan would be the guy, but is Cowing a help for them on offense, you think?
I think if you don't have Ayuk, you need a standard X,
sure.
And that's Chris Conley. I think Chris Conley is a good backup X in this league. I think that he's part of a really efficient wide receiver group that we have here, and by efficient, I mean you've got guys that can perform several roles, including special teams. So Cowing's your punt returner. And Ronnie Bell's your backup punt returner. Ronnie also made the team. He's the 7th receiver. And Chris Conley, if he's backing up Brandon Ayuk, then he could still play and contribute as a gunner for the 49ers. And that also gives you some leeway with Ricky Pearsall because one of those 6 or one of those 7 or 2 of those 7 receivers could be inactive on game day. And if Ricky Pearsall's not 100%, then you could continue slow playing him to make sure that the shoulder is okay. So I see the direct Ayuk replacement in case they do need to fill in for him for a time as Chris Conley because he's a prototypical X who can block. He's got this similar body type as Brandon Ayuk, and he just does everything technically right. And I think that Kyle Shanahan really appreciates that for a replacement player. Somebody as a backup, you got to make sure the floor stays consistently high, and I think somebody like Chris Conley gives you a really solid floor.
Is there a deadline date per se where Ayuk needs to sign and show up by before you anticipate him playing in week 1? Or, I mean, could it be like Bosa, you sign the day before and you play? I mean, it's a different position, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, yesterday. But, I mean, just as John Lynch says, I think you said it on your show.
We missed it.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, I mean, you would have wanted him back by now because the football callus is a real thing, right?
Yeah.
That being said, when Brock Purdy first entered the offense in 2022, yeah, it didn't take long to find rapport with Ayuk. That's just one of his guys, right? Maybe his main guy. So there's that. I think from an operational standpoint, they could probably hit the ground running. But I think from the health standpoint, you could be working out as hard as you want, but if you're not out on the actual football field doing actual football stuff, you're putting yourself at more risk, and inherently something will be a little bit off, right? So they want to get him out there as quickly as possible. But I do think that from the standpoint of, okay, how do we integrate him into the offense? I do think they've already shown that they can get on the same page quickly, Purdy and Ayuk. So I don't think that will take long at all, but you do want your guys there with significant time before the regular season so they could polish some of the small stuff before they take the field.
David Lombardi of The Athletic, the voice you hear on the UMA guest line. What does the news about Talanoa Hufanga not starting on the PUP tell you about his health?
So that means the 49ers think that he'll be back at full speed before the week 5 mark, right? Because if he started on PUP, then he wouldn't be eligible to come back for the first 4 weeks. They obviously think that he's going to be ready fully at some point before then. I don't think it necessarily means they think he'll be 100% by week 1 because he hasn't practiced yet, and you're coming up on that time before the season. But as long as it's week 2, 3, or even 4, then they feel it's worth it because he's such a good player. So I know that they're going to continue to ease him back into the fold. I don't think there's been any setbacks throughout the course of that entire recovery. Talanoa was really open with us in spring, and he said, I'm probably not going to be back for training camp, but my goal is to be back for week 1, and I think that still seems like a possibility. Although, right now you could start Jair Brown and George Odom, or even Malik Mustafa, who's been taking some first-team reps in place of Odom, who rolled his ankle on Friday. So you have other options at that safety position to where I really don't think that you have to be panicking if you're the 49ers if Talanoa is not 100% ready to go on September 9th.
What did you make of the report? We know Pearsall's been dealing with the shoulder most of camp. What did you make of the report that was something the Niners knew about before they drafted him? I know a lot of people made a big deal of that. I didn't know what to make of it, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm sure they wouldn't have drafted a guy if they would have thought it was going to be a chronic thing moving forward. But that whole thing, I don't know. I really couldn't get my mind around it. What did you think of it?
I would be very alarmed if the 49ers didn't know about it because it was a public injury that he suffered his junior year of college. So if they didn't know about it, that means they weren't doing their homework.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, this is football. All of these guys have gotten hurt at some point in their careers. And Kyle Shanahan maintains that 80% of the locker room has suffered the injury that Pearsall has suffered, which is a slight dislocation of the shoulder. I don't know if that number is fully accurate from Kyle Shanahan, but I get his point, and I think that it does allow us to zoom out and look at this from a rational perspective, and that is, in a sport like football, injury mitigation and the research that goes into that, and then the plan that goes into that from some of the best medical experts in the world and orthopedic surgeons, that's all a huge part of running a football team. This is not like a game of Madden where you turn injuries off and then just draft everybody and then everybody plays all 17 games. That's not the case. I think for so many of these players, the media and the fans don't even know about a lot of the things that the doctors discover at the physicals and the examinations at the combine. But then the teams have to play this game of risk assessment where they have to determine, okay, well, yeah, this guy's got a shoulder, this guy has something with his knee. Do we think that we can work with it? Okay, do we think that we can turn him into a productive player? And nothing comes without risk, right? So I think that the fact that this came out about Pearsall, I think people took it way out of context and acted like he was the only player with a shoulder injury in the entire draft. It's not the case, right? There's guys that have been fighting through a lot of stuff, and the 49ers decided that this is worth their risk, that they feel that they can work him back into health. Unfortunately, he has suffered a couple recurrences of it over the course of this year in OTAs and now in training camp. So they have decided that the best way forward, because I don't think they want to turn to surgery just yet, they've decided that the best way forward is to rest it so that he could give them as much as possible this season.
Got it.
Both Josh Dobbs and Brandon Allen make the team. Not announced, I don't think, officially yet who the backup is. Any feel for you on that position?
I knew they were going to take 3 just because I know they want to stockpile that position. I mean, it's served them so well in the past.
Sure.
Remember with Brock Purdy making the team in 2022. And both of those guys had really good training camps. I can't, really get a firm read, though, on where they're at. The way that I've seen it is that Brandon Allen opened with a big lead because he already knew the system and was definitely the guy that gave you a higher floor. But I think some of what Josh Dobbs has given them in terms of extending plays, and he's made some impressive throws from sideline to sideline as well. Some of that has had to make Kyle Shanahan think a little bit. So they could decide that, too, on a week-by-week basis. Like, who's playing better against the scout team of that particular defense, right? It's not something that the 49ers have to have set in stone 2 weeks before the start of the regular season and, keep it that way for all 17 weeks. So I think they're happy with the options there. I think they're also really happy that both of those guys put a lot of good football on tape in the preseason, because if a team becomes quarterback needy over the course of the year, that's the most important position, so those guys could have a little bit of trade value.
What do you think the next step is for Brock Purdy this year?
I think he's got to cut down on the interceptions. That was his only statistical weakness last year, as in the only spot where you looked at the advanced profile of Brock Purdy, the interceptions were the only spot where he was a little bit below average. He was in the 20s. Everything else, and that's what made everything else, the total numbers, so epically impressive, is because he was number one in efficiency despite the fact that he was below average in interceptions. So it just goes to show you, if he cuts down the interceptions a little bit, his lead in efficiency grows even bigger, which to me is like, that's jaw-dropping to me. You would think, by the way, that some people talk about Brock Purdy, that the only way that he would have been able to be number one in efficiency would be because he was managing every game, being really careful, not throwing any picks. But that's not the case. I mean, he was out there taking chances, and I think he might have erred a little too much on the chance-taking side at times. And I think with more experience, knowing when that robber safety's coming down, stuff like that, he can cut down on some of the giveaways, and that can make him even better.
Voice here is David Lombardi of The Athletic. Does a great job covering the Niners throughout the season, and he'll join us a handful of times on our shows throughout the season. Anyway, before I let you go, David, your thoughts on the strong possibility or lack thereof that either of these deals are done by the time we hear from John Lynch tomorrow afternoon? Because they did add that to the media schedule.
They did, but they always add it to the media schedule. Lynch always speaks after the cut downs to talk about his roster. So I'm sure he's not really looking forward to speaking to the media after the cut downs.
Imagine not, no.
The roster. But I mean, John's a professional. He'll be able to get through those questions. But with Trent Williams especially, I would really think the 49ers want true movement on that, because everybody can recognize that Trent has a lot of leverage in this situation. Just because if there is no Trent, there probably is no Super Bowl run for the 49ers. And he's 36 with $150 million in the bank and a private jet at home. So this is a guy that can walk away from the game and be a first ballot Hall of Famer in 5 years. I guess you have a little bit of leverage over him if he truly wants to win a Super Bowl, and I think that is on the list for Trent Williams. But the bottom line is that he can much more credibly walk away from the table than Brandon Ayuk, and that's the definition of leverage, right? Is your ability to walk away. So with Trent being in such a good position, that's one where the 49ers, I think you might cave sooner rather than later there. The problem is I see exactly why this is difficult, because it's coming the year after Bosa and the year before Purdy, and Trent is 36. So, what if he does retire after this season and you did give him a bunch of new guaranteed money and a pay raise? Then you're saddled with like a $30 million dead money bill when you have to pay Brock Purdy? That could be problematic right now. I could see that from the 49ers. So they got to find a way to thread the needle, and maybe one way to thread the needle is to make sure that Trent Williams plays for at least 2 more years.
David, we always appreciate the time, man. Great insight and information as always. We'll keep reading you and following you, and we'll talk to you soon, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.